Welcome to Novelist Spotlight. This is Mike Consol, your host. Before we begin this episode, I want to alert you that my latest book is now available in both print and ebook formats. The title is Love American Style, and it is a collection of short stories about men, women, their passions, and their dysfunctions. There's a short link in the episode notes that will take you to my Amazon profile page, where all 4 of my books are listed. 3 novels in this new short story collection. Again, the title of the new one is Love American Style, named after the TV series that ran from 1969 until 1974. Now, on with our program. In the spotlight is biographer Laurence Leamer, author of biographies about Truman Capote, Johnny Carson, the Kennedy women, Alfred Hitchcock, Ingrid Bergman. He's also written about the epic courtroom battle that brought down the Ku Klux Klan, written a book about Mar-a-Lago, subtitled Inside the Gates of Power at Donald Trump's Presidential Palace. I mentioned Truman Capote, and you might be watching the Hulu series titled Feud, Capote versus the Swans. That is based on Lawrence's book called Capote's Women. And he joins me now from, I think, Manhattan, New York. Where are you, Lawrence?
Washington, D.C.
Washington, D.C. Is that home for you?
Are you from the IRS?
No, I'm
No,
not. No, I'm not.
Florida's my home. I spent half my time in Florida.
Do you? Okay. Let's start with this Capote series, which my wife and I have been watching. Tremendous cast. You just told me it got how many Emmy nominations? Was it 5?
It got Diane Lane, Naomi Watts, Tom Hollander, and the guy that just died.
I know who you're talking about. Treat Williams.
Treat Williams, and then and Gus Van Sant, the director, got one too.
Wow. So it's been very successful, well done. But that's from a perspective of a guy watching it on TV. Authors always have a different perspective on this. Are you happy with how they have interpreted your book, your biography, or if you do see some weak spots in there, go ahead and illustrate them for us.
Well, I would say that what I admire is it was artistic daring. It wasn't a paint by number sort of series. It took all these kind of big chances. Some worked and some didn't work. So I salute them for doing that.
Now, so they took talk about the big chances. What kind of chances did they take?
Well, let's see. They had they would cut back. They had a whole hour about James Baldwin. That was totally made up. James Baldwin didn't even know Capote, but they have him as a player and having lunch.
Oh, interesting. I had no idea. I had said, it's funny. I turned to my wife and said, I had no idea he had a relationship like that with James Baldwin. But
Right.
yeah, you can never really quite trust Hollywood's version of it. I mean, it sounds like I don't know if this was for diversity's sake or they were also trying to shed light on another great writer at the time or a combination of the two.
Knowing Hollywood, it was probably more diversity. There's no white judges left. If you got to have a black character somewhere, make him a judge, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it was an all white story, and they wanted to have a black character, and that was the way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I
But
hear
the
you.
other thing, Ann Woodward was a woman who she was she had an unhappy marriage, a rich woman in Long Island, and there were burglars around in that area, and she thought she heard a burglar, and she got up with a shock, and she shot and killed her husband, and it was just a terrible accident. And all the reporting, all the police reports said that, and Truman knew all of that, but Truman said that she murdered him, so the series went with that.
Yeah. And she was played by Demi Moore, I believe,
Yeah,
correct?
yeah.
Yeah.
Would have
Yeah.
been
It's a
better.
tremendous cast.
This is an example where the truthful story would have been better. And this poor woman, she didn't kill her husband, and Truman then writes about it in answered prayers in the excerpt that was an Esquire that got in mother's trouble with his friends, and she committed suicide.
Yeah. Yeah. Just tragic. Tragic. Um, Let me ask you, obviously, I say you're a biographer, you are a biographer, but how do you describe what you do? Do you just say I'm a biographer,
No,
or
I'm not a
do you have,
biographer.
what
I
do you call
maybe I was a
yourself?
biographer at one time. I'm a storyteller. Okay.
But when you write about Capote or Hitchcock, you are dealing with factual information.
I am, but I got into journalism in the '60s when new journalism was coming into being. Guys like Tom Wolfe and Mailer and Gates Leese and others using fictional-like techniques in nonfiction. And I mean, Tom Wolfe is the best of them all. And if you want to go, and I don't like his politics, but if you want to know what the '60s are like, you got to read Tom Wolfe. So I got into it that period, and I try to make it fiction like. I try to make it a story that is irresistible, that the reader's going to go on and read it to the end. That's the idea.
Well, and that's exactly how Truman Capote catapulted to fame. When he wrote In Cold Blood, wasn't that about the very first true crime novel or true crime story that was written like a novel? It reads just like a novel, correct?
Exactly, exactly. And it was a masterpiece. But curiously enough, there was a movie that was made of In Cold Blood right then, and it got all the awards. It was a great movie. Now you watch it, and it's uh, just like a standard police television drama. Okay, this has become such a genre. There's so much of this stuff. The screen is cluttered with this stuff, and that's what all began.
You know, you write about you've done bios, told stories about some really big names. Let's take Johnny Carson, intensely private man. Did you have, was this, I'm not familiar with that particular book titled King of the Night. Cooperation from him? Was he already gone at the time? Cooperation from
No,
his
no.
family?
I'll tell you. Listen, here's the dirty little secret. Every writer I know answers the phone is desperate to get a phone call to get away from the solitude of just sitting there trying to write. Right now, I grab my right hand and I hold it because I don't want the world to know that I'm going to answer the phone on the first ring. I don't want the world to know how desperate I am. Okay, so so Johnny Carson, I got his home phone number, and I'm one of these people. If I'm in a certain mood, my mother would hang up on me, okay? If I'm in the wrong mood. If I'm in the right mood, anybody can talk. I'll talk to get anybody to talk. Well, I was in the right mood finally on a Friday evening, about 7 o'clock. And I knew I'd have somebody to pick the phone. I'd have to get through him. I had to get through the butler. I'd have to get through the assistant, finally to get to Johnny. But I was ready to do it. I was going to get all the way there. And I dialed the number. It's hard at the first ring. Hello, hello. It's Johnny sitting desperately by himself on a Friday evening waiting for a phone call. But he didn't talk to me. He didn't talk to me because if you're rich, you better be good to your ex-wives because the ex-wives were one of my best sources for that book, and he horribly mistreated them. He was a wife beater, terrible wife beater. Joanne Carson, his second wife, showed me the divorce papers, which he had to pay to have her chin redone. So that's how bad he was.
Wow.
But he was a
Wow.
great entertainer. But nobody's going to have the longevity of Johnny Carson. He understood popular culture. He went just to the edge and not over it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I remember watching for many years. I mean, he was a great entertainer, a great talk show host, and so on. Why Truman Capote? How did it come about? When did you decide I'm going to write about Truman Capote?
Well, I was going to write a totally different book about a friend of mine, Susan Zirinsky, who then was the president of CBS News, the first woman president. I wanted to write a book about her, and she was trying to decide if she wanted to do it. So I was reading various kinds of books, and I read a book about William F. Paley, and I found his wife, Babe Paley, more interesting, and that led me to look at the Swans, and I thought, what a book this would be.
Got you. Yeah. Yeah. What an amazing story that is. I mean, it's also just painful to watch the series that your book was based on, his inability, the demons he had, his inability to stop drinking, and just the self-destruction that went on there.
Well,
Um,
so many writers are like that, okay? And so many young writers think, gee, if I want to become a great writer, I better drink a lot. Not so.
well, what do you attribute his writer's block? I mean, he had horrible writer's block. Do you think it was because of the drinking, or
Well,
was there some other elements involved?
okay, what is a writer's block? A writer's block is what is writing? Writing is solving problems. It's sitting in front of your computer screen and solving one problem after the next. Writer's block is when you can't solve that problem. So what do? You got to figure out maybe the problem is too big or it's the wrong angle. You got to figure out a different way to do it and get through that. I mean, he just couldn't go. If I had known Truman, I'd say, Truman, this isn't going to work out. What you got to do is go back and tell the story of your failure to tell this story. That's your
Mm,
book. The failure that would work perfectly, Truman. You can do it that way. Just forget it. Just tell that failure story.
That's interesting what you said because I've never heard anybody say that before, that writing is solving problems. Tell us more about that.
Well, that's what I think. That's just what I think it is. And I
I mean,
think
can you go a little deeper on it though, and just in terms of when I write, I think anybody who writes says you run into these roadblocks or these can write yourself into a corner very easily, and then you have to start to figure out how do I get out of this. Is that what you're talking
yeah,
about? Or
it's the same. It's the same thing. You just have to realize you you can't do this. You got to figure a different way to do it, and realize that. I mean, I have 20 writer's blocks a day.
yeah, but it's very short-lived. I mean, you've
Yeah.
never had an abiding bout of writer's block, correct? Not like Truman Capote had. He
No, but I
simply
had to
couldn't
make a
write
living.
anymore.
I had to make a living.
Do you think that's a big part of the difference between somebody who's actually able to overcome writer's block? There's just a lot of force but behind the effort to write. That I'm not doing this as a dilettante. I need to make some money, and that
Well, that's
means
what I do.
keep at
That's my
it.
career. I mean,
Yeah.
that
Oh
if
yeah.
I'm an amateur professional, he's an amateur, maybe writes one book and sits there and if it doesn't go right, is just disappointed. I would already be on my next book before that book came out.
What happened in your life, or what was the turning point where you decided what I want to do with my writing is be a storyteller slash biographer?
Well, I went to the Peace Corps in Nepal for 2 years. I came back, had a fellowship at the University of Oregon, International Development. I was bored to death. I took a course in magazine writing, just an indulgence. And there was some money from the Wallace Foundation, of Reader's Digest fame, and I got to some of that money and talked my way into George Wallace's plane, his first trip to the West, when running for president. And I spent a week traveling around with him and submitted an article to the New Republic. And lo and behold, the New Republic published it. That was so exciting to me. And so then I did a bunch of interviews for this new student magazine with presidential candidates, including Bobby Kennedy, the week before he died. And I applied to the Columbia School of Journalism and got a big fellowship. And but again, I was looking at Tom Wolfe and Norman Mailer, and I focused on magazine writing in the school. I had one absolutely miserable year. I had three job offers. I can hardly believe it, not to even think about it. I had three jobs: the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and Newsweek. And fool that I am, I chose Newsweek. And it was the most incredibly unhappy 8, 10 months of my life. And after 10 months, they fired me. And then I went off. And from then on, I've been a freelance writer my whole life.
What was it about the Newsweek experience? Why did you hate that job?
First of all, I've never been called a writer more and felt one less. Uh, Writing is about taking individual responsibility, and there was no individual responsibility. In some ways, it's a perfect world for a man because you sat in your office, and outside your office sat a woman. She was the fact checker. If you didn't, if you had didn't know the fact, you wrote 00 or TK, and it was her responsible to fill it in. If there were any mistakes in the story when it was published, it's not your fault. It was her fault. So that's the way it was. But it was just miserable. There's no kind of responsibility. I remember when the correspondent, the reporters in the field, and I was on the foreign side, so it's all these foreign correspondents, and they would file these thick uh, uh, documents, each with this maybe 20-page, whatever it was. And I would boil that down, look at the New York Times and Wall Street Journal, and rewrite it. And I'd feel terribly guilty that the stuff I'd done and how I changed it and everything. So the African correspondent came home for his yearly trip. And we went out, had a few drinks. And after a few drinks, I said, Harry, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. You you submit this incredible material. It's so vivid and so incredibly good. And I just take it and make this junk out of it. And he says, don't be so sorry. What do you think I do? So that's when you don't have any real responsibility. He knew his words as such wouldn't go in there, so he didn't give a damn after a while. And that's what happened. I remember another time, uh, Ambassador Elbrook in Brazil was the first political kidnapping. He was kidnapped in Rio, and he was released in the suburbs. And the Newsweek correspondent did a really lousy job. He just sent in a couple pages, so I had to really kind of invent things. So I wrote this piece that began when Juan Matisse, that way we knew the name of the taxi driver. When Juan Matisse drives his car through the snarling streets of Rio, he either talks about last week's soccer match or the latest bossa nova. But last week, all he talked about was a kidnapping of Ambassador Albrecht. He was in the suburbs and he saw this tall, gaunt figure there who jumped in the back seat of the car, opened the back door and jumped in. And Batiste turned to him and said, "Ah, Ambassador, it is you." That was published. Go back and look at the magazine that was published. It was totally made up. And the correspondent said he was being the laughing stock of Rio. Number one, because there was no such thing as the latest bossa nova. It's like the latest minuet. All the taxi cabs were Volkswagen Beetles, and you couldn't open the back door. There were all kinds of things like that. And I wasn't blamed. He was berated for not sending in a decent file. That's Newsweek.
Well, why were you fired then? You weren't responsible for any mistakes. Why were you fired?
I probably was too. In other words, I didn't know how to deal in the corporate world. There are two stories. You wrote one story on Thursday, another story on Friday. Okay, the rest of the week you just sat around and BS with your buddies. And I didn't find these guys interesting. I had one friend there, Richard Levine. I'd go into his office and talk, or I'd sit in my office and read. My wife would make a sandwich for me. I'd just sit there and read. Not a good idea. You had to go out with these guys and drink with them and be their buddies if you wanted to advance. That's what mattered, not the journalism.
Hmm. So once you're gone from Newsweek, you said you spent the rest of your career as a freelance writer. When did you decide, though, that I want to pick an individual, I want to write about somebody and write an entire book about somebody?
When did I do that? Well, first of all, I did it. I wrote a book about the underground press. I had a grant from the 20th Century Fund, and then I wrote a book, Playing for Keeps in Washington, about the 12 most powerful people in Washington in their lives. So it was already going in that direction. And then I started writing biographies. I wrote a biography of Ronald and Nancy Reagan and Ingrid Bergman. That's the direction I went. And my biggest book ever was The Kennedy Women, which took 5 years. And it's 900 pages long. It was a #2 bestseller. It probably wouldn't be these days, but it was then.
Yeah, yeah. Getting back to Truman Capote, do you think that success came too early for him, or would it not have made a
I
difference? I
think
mean,
early
so,
success is not that great, okay?
pardon
I,
me?
listen, I'm 82 years old, okay? I've had a roller coaster career, okay? Kennedy Women was #2. I've had 6 New York Times bestsellers. But right now, I've got, that series. I mean, I went to the premiere. I was invited. I walked the red carpet. I'm 82 years old. Better to get it at 82 than when Truman did when he was 23.
Do you think that's part of what messed him up with the alcohol and the sex addiction and
It's
all?
overwhelming at that age.
Yeah.
You no longer yourself. You play yourself.
How much input were you given? Obviously, it's based on your book, so that's a tremendous amount of input. But how much did they also just sit down with you and talk to you and say, "We want to kind of work this out, give us some guidance on certain scenes and such"?
Are you kidding? That's not how Hollywood works. They didn't want anything to do with me. I had to talk my way onto the set. I had to pay my way to go on the set one day. They were going to limit the time I was in there. I walked in, and here's this big director's chair, and I sit in it. And afterwards, this old guy in jeans, kind of disheveled looking guy, comes over and says, "Hi, I'm Gus. And I said, yes, hi, I'm Larry. What do you do, Gus? He says, I'm Gus Van Sant. I'm the director. Not good.
From Portland, Oregon. I
Yeah.
remember Gus. Yeah. Okay.
He's fabulous. He's a kind of modest, he's a modest demeanor. He gets things right.
Now, what do you think Truman Capote could have achieved and never did because of I mean, what was it? Unanswered prayers or
Answer.
answered prayers was going to be his masterpiece. He was never able to turn it out. If he had not had the drinking problem, some of these demons that he had, I know this is total speculation, Laurence, but what do you think he was capable achieving that he never did?
Okay, you first shouldn't announce that you're writing a masterpiece, right? Maybe you should wait until the world tells you that when it comes out. So when you say it's a masterpiece, you're in trouble already. Okay, so he was in big trouble. He couldn't write it. His most creative act was to pretend he was writing it. His long-term lover said he was sitting in his bed. He was sitting in his bed in the morning with movie magazines and on the phone telling people he's writing his book. He wasn't writing it. He couldn't write it. But yes, he had it in him. So many more great things he could have done.
You know, he um, Breakfast at Tiffany's was a book that he and Norman Mailer there was a lot of static between them, but after Norman Mailer read that book, he said something about it being as close to a perfect book as you could get,
Yeah,
something like
I
that.
got to tell my Norman Mailer story. I
Yeah,
was
please.
invited to a party at Norman Mailer. A friend of mine was invited, and she was a photographer. My book Playing for Keeps. And so she wanted me to come as her escort. She came up from Washington. I was in New York. She had this leather uh, bag that she had with her. And we took the subway over to Brooklyn to where we had an apartment on the top, walk up 5 story, walk up. And we get up a few blocks. Here are all these limousines in the street. Okay. So we walk up 5 stories and stairs, and there we go in there. And everybody famous in America is there. Go Vidal, Jackie, you name it. Everybody famous is there. And I walked around, I'm like, God, this is going to be the conversations must be fascinating. But it was just people kind of showing off and talking about bragging about what they were doing. This is the time when Mailer was in his fighting period. Remember, he'd fight all the time.
Yes.
He fought with his accountant that day, and basically Norman was a sensitive little Jewish boy. Didn't want to be a sensitive little Jewish boy, and he fought. He put his fists up, and he fought the way I fought. I remember when my this guy took my girlfriend away. And when I was in college, we fought that with their fists out. We didn't know how the hell to fight. And Mailer didn't know how to fight either, okay, in the middle of the party. It was time to leave. And these famous people were there, not because they knew Truman, not because they knew Mailer, because he was famous and so were they. And so they went out. Well, I wasn't famous, and I was invited, and I'm this polite kid from upstate New York. So with this leather bag over my shoulder, I went up to Mailer, put my right hand out to shake his hand, said, "Thank you, Mr. Mailer, for having me." He said, "Thank you. You've done a good job. I'll hire you another time." So my friend and I got down the next landing and just fell down in laughter.
You said upstate New York. Where are you from, Lawrence?
You never heard of it. Vestal, VST.
Vestal. I grew up in Endicott.
Yeah, are you
Endicott,
serious?
New York. I was born at Ideal Hospital.
Oh my God. We hated
Yes.
you. I liked you until now, but now when you're from Endicott,
Yeah, I'm from the wrong side of the river, right? The Susquehanna
oh
River
man,
divided us.
you were the guy. You were the guy troubling people that took our women away. And we fought you in football. It was the war, it was a religious war. You remained the Catholics, we remained the Protestants.
Did you ever think about writing a book about the Appalachian mob bust there? Remember, they stayed on the
Yeah,
Vestal
no.
Parkway.
Yeah, I had a friend that lived right there. No, but I think that area would be fascinating. First of all, you had two major companies. You had Endicott Johnson Shoe Company,
Mhm.
and Endicott Johnson was very paternalistic. No unions, but they treated the employees very well and it helped them buy little homes. And
Mhm.
during the Depression, uh, Mr. Johnson had free milk for everybody in the Triple Cities, and then you had IBM, which started there. Imagine that.
Yes.
IBM started right there. So you had the factory workers and you had the IBM employees in their white shirts. Even if they're in the factory line, they wear white shirts. My brother's an economist, and he wrote a couple chapters about it, about the shoe industry. It started in Massachusetts. They came to Endicott because they're cheaper workers. It stayed there. The shoes companies, many of them went to the South at that point. The employees, to save the company, took their pension plan and invested it in the company, and the whole thing went bad. But that's a great story.
Yeah, the all the shoe manufacturing went overseas, and then EJ Shoes, as they were called. I worked at the EJ Shoe store on the Vestal Parkway. My grandfather, my paternal grandfather, worked at Endicott. He came over from Italy, like a lot of Italians did,
Wow.
and worked at Endicott Johnson Shoe Factory. Hard work with harsh chemicals and all that. But you're right; they treated their employees very well. They even had doctors on staff
Yeah, no.
that you could go to. So ahead of their time, and of course, IBM still a powerhouse today.
Well,
Interesting.
well, I'll tell you, I bet it was you may have gotten shoes. We went on Thursday. Thursday was 10% off. Remember that?
I don't remember that, but
Oh
it's
man,
been a
you
long
must have been a
time.
rich guy. That's poor people. We went on Thursday. It was 10% off.
Yeah, well, there you go. There you go. They also made the boots for the soldiers in World
Yeah,
War
no, no, no.
II.
They just
Yeah.
what happened to them was they made wonderful sturdy shoes, and people didn't want that anymore. They wanted these glitzy things that didn't last very long.
Yeah. Yeah. They were definitely just a practical shoe company. So, and okay, Vestal, New York, and then on from there. How is there any commonality to the subjects you pick, the people you pick to write about?
No, I like to make it different. I'd have a better career if I did what James Patterson does and just write the same book over and over again, okay? Or John Grisham does the same thing. He writes a book a year, and you know when you get a Grisham what you're going to get, so you carry your audience with you. I don't do that. I mean, each time I have to build somewhat of a different audience. Well, I carry some readers with me.
But yeah, for instance, you write about Alfred Hitchcock. There's Truman Capote. There is Johnny Carson. Is there anything about the people you choose that is it just these are people I'm interested in, or is
I
there
think
some kind of through
I'm
line?
never bored. I think everybody's interesting, right? Everybody, you listen to them and get them to tell their story. Everybody has a great story to tell. That's the way I feel.
Who did you want to write about that you weren't able to?
I wanted about Marlon Brando.
And why he you don't you write about people even without cooperation. So what was it that staunched you?
Because a fellow writer, hearing I was doing it and knowing I was going to get a big, big advance to do it, got somebody else to do that book so I wouldn't get the big advance.
Mm,
A wonderful profession.
gotcha. So talk a little bit about well, actually, I want to. You're a nonfiction writer, and
I've
this
written
is
two
a
novels, but anyway.
okay. That's exactly what I was going to ask you about. Talk about you have written two novels. Is that what you just said, Lawrence?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
both were published, or did you decide it
Yeah,
wasn't for you? You wanted the story, the nonfiction storytelling.
yeah, no, two novels are published.
Talk about the difference between writing fiction and nonfiction. I mean, on the surface, of course, we understand that, but did you have a preference? What was more difficult? What were maybe it was there, did the fiction serve you very well in your storytelling about the idiosyncratic and famous?
I don't think it's that different to do it right. Again, you're telling a story, and you in the nonfiction you're limited and really limited to the facts. And many writers don't do it. There's so many just I hate to say that, but many people just kind of invent stuff.
You mean even when they're doing nonfiction writing?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you hear all the time about that. It's. I think autobiographies are more prone to that, don't you?
Oh no,
Because when you're
memoir.
telling your own story, people
Exactly.
sanitize it.
Exactly.
I mean, who would waste their time with a presidential biography? I mean, they're not going to tell you the truth.
Right, exactly. I think Obama probably did better than most.
Did he? I didn't read it, but um, let me ask you about your working style. What's your writing regimen when you're in the middle of a project? You're writing, for instance, we're going to talk about your next project, which I guess you're working on right now. What is are you a guy who gets up 6 in the morning and works 5 straight hours? Are you an evening writer? Is there a certain
No, I
place
just
you
get up.
have to be?
I get up in the morning and I work until I'm kind of tired. And I get, alas, I get tired easier now than I used to.
And do
I
you
work pretty hard.
write in the same, do you have a writing desk? Do you write in the same room all the time, or are you more of a kinetic writer where you might go to
No,
a
no,
coffee house?
no, I just sit in the same miserable place. I look at right now, I'm looking out of Washington, beautiful sight looking out of the Washington skyline.
Nice. Okay. Okay. So what triggers your creativity? Yeah, creativity comes and goes, but is there anything that
I
you
don't think it's, to
do?
me, it's this magical thing. It's like, I'll write this sentence. I say, wow, that was good. And did I write that? Somebody wrote it. I'm just going over my new book. Who the hell wrote this? And I said, geez, I wrote it too. But you just don't know. We don't know where it comes from.
So who or what is your new book? Tell us as much as you can about it, and when is it going to be available?
It's Warhol's Muses. It's about the women around Warhol, okay, that he called the superstars. And it is one dark book, I'm going to tell you. It's very dark.
I'm not surprised. Now, you like to write about men and the women who surround them. There's Hitchcock's Blondes.
No,
There's
that's what this
Rodin
is, a
is a band.
trilogy. It's the third part of a trilogy of a creative genius and the women around him. But these women with Warhol don't end up very well. Two of them died, three of them were drug addicts, and the other one was half crazy.
Now, why'd you pick Warhol?
A friend of mine came up with the idea, and I thought, what a great idea, because nobody's done this. He's been written about mainly by people who are quote unquote art critics, and they don't have a journalistic mentality. But what a story this is! And I was very lucky. I've got the Warhol from 1965 on, with the public. When the first cassette recorders came out, he got one of the first, and he started recording people from the morning on all day long. He recorded his phone calls. If he went out to lunch with you, he wouldn't tell you, but he'd be recording it. So there are 3,500 of these tapes. Now, the Warhol Foundation has had these for all these years since his death. These are fragile tapes. They haven't digitalized them. They've done nothing. There's so much darkness on these things. They don't want them out there. But blast the trumpets. The archivist at the Warhol Museum gave me the transcripts for the years that I'm writing about, and that is explosive stuff.
Talk about the darkness. Was the darkness depression? Was it the drugs and drinking? What made his world so dark?
The center of the world was amphetamine, and maybe I'm not the best person to write about this, or maybe I am, because two of my friends were amphetamine addicts. One of them died in 1967 in the summer of love in San Francisco. He shot himself up in the bathroom. He OD'd, and they got up and walked him around. He went right back and shot himself up again because he wanted to die. My other friend, had a terrible habit. He got out. He started this first sleep lab at Yale University, but he was a broken man and he died young. So I don't look at amusement with amphetamine, and I don't look. Lou Reed of the Velvet Underground wrote a song, Heroin, which kind of romanticized heroin, okay? And years later, when he was in AA or Alcoholics AA, when he went in there, one of these people said, "Why are you here? You're the one that suckered me into heroin." And so
Yeah.
Warhol did the same way. In his movies, there's no bad consequences to drug taking. The Chelsea Girls, here's Bridget and some of they're shooting up. They're shooting up, and nothing bad happens to them. I know what happens when people shoot up. It was really wrong for him to do.
Now you're talking of the women who surrounded him were his muses, you're saying.
Yeah.
Did you say no?
Yes.
Yes. So tell me the focal point of the book. Obviously, Andy Warhol. a lot of time in Studio 54, maybe. You probably
No,
get
that
into
was
that.
later. That was later. My book ends around 1972. My book is those crucial years from about 1964 on.
Now, Warhol was gay, right?
The point was
And
good.
but he was surrounded by Truman Capote was gay and surrounded by women. That's not unusual, I guess. Um,
And lapsed Catholic. They were almost all Catholic, which
huh.
I found that interesting too.
And so when will your Warhol book come out?
Next May 6th,
And the title one more time?
Warhol's Muses.
Okay, what were his muses then?
These 8 women, including Candy Darling, who was transsexual.
So
The
these people inspired his art and his lifestyle.
Yeah, the subtitle is it's Warhol's Muses, the artists, misfits, and superstars destroyed by the factory fame machine.
Hmm. Wow. So, Lawrence, what obsesses you?
Whatever I'm doing, the way I'm talking about this right now, I'm obsessed with this. I'm looking at the cover right now. I just totally obsessed with it.
What was a turning point in your writing life? Was it getting fired at Newsweek, or was there some point at which you knew this is what I want to do, or hey,
No,
I'm
I
good
won't
at
say
this
that.
and I'm gonna make it doing this?
Okay, I knew. Look, when you're young, you're ambitious, and you look at everybody else of your generation. How are they doing? I wrote one book. What are they doing? Okay, so I couldn't figure out a second book. So I'm kind of thinking, I gotta. The longer I wait, the bigger, more important it has to be. And so one day I'm going for a run, and suddenly I realized nobody gives a damn. Nobody gives a damn about me. So if I'm going to do this, I got to do it for myself, for my own rights. And that totally transformed me. Nobody cares whether my friends don't care whether my book's a success or not. They're my friends.
So, how did that? So, are you saying that you were writing for other people previously, and then when you had this epiphany, you decided I need to write for myself. I
Yeah,
need
you
to.
want you wrote because you wanted to show off, because you wanted attention, you wanted to be famous, and finally you realize that's nonsense, and just do it because that's what you do. That's what you
Hmm.
love doing, as hard as it is.
Hmm. Hmm. So that changed your writing style. Well, it changed your mindset. You changed your mindset.
Uh,
It did the actual. So the actual writing style must have changed somewhat.
Right. But you know what? I've been, you can't do this having people around you that and I've had 2 wives, and they both were extremely supportive. And when I was writing my book, Playing of Keeps in Washington, I was writing things for the Washingtonian magazine. And Jack Limpert, who's usually considered a kind of selfish, self-involved guy, but he gave me $500 a month on account. Okay, doesn't sound like much now, but that was a lot of money back then. Okay, and I was able to survive because of that. And of course, when the book came out, I did the stories and got it over. But that's kind of generous act. I couldn't have gone along. I couldn't have succeeded without it.
Interesting. So I'm going to ask you a compound question. You're not supposed to ask compound questions, but this isn't a complicated one. What is the key to being a good storyteller? And then also, what is the key to being a good biographer?
Well, to me, the key is the best. It's it's detail. I mean, Tom Wolfe had that sense. You have to get the details right. If you get the details, uh, look in the book of Daniel but Daniel by Doctor was one of my favorite novels, and in it tells the story of the Rosenberg sons and how they were adopted by this nice couple, and in it they describe the living room. And the New Yorker magazines are there, a whole bunch of them. And remember, years ago, the New Yorker would have these brown sleeves around them. Okay.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so they're in the living room, like 10 or 12 of them, and the brown sleeves are there. That's one sentence. Now, what does that really say? First of all, these people have sort of literary pretensions. They want to read the New Yorker, okay? But they don't, for whatever the reason, they don't have time to do it. But they're intellectually honest. Anybody else would take those sleeves off so that people don't know they're not reading it. So you know so much about these people just by that one sentence. So you want your book to have this kind of thing in it, the details that resonate. I mean, John Leonard years ago said that I was great in small things. In reviews of, actually, in the review of Playing for Keeps in Washington, some of my friends said, "What a put down!" It wasn't a put down. Maybe I'm not great at small things, but I'm very good in small things. And you build the small things, one small thing after the next, and you end up with big things.
Yeah, exactly. It's brick by brick. John Leonard, he was a book reviewer for Newsweek, correct?
No, no, for the New York Times.
Didn't he, wasn't he at Newsweek also though?
Maybe
Or
it
was
wasn't
it
time, but he was the
okay.
top. He was it at the New York Times. Wonderful
Uh
reviewer.
yeah, yeah, famous name for sure. Um so at what age did you know that you wanted to write?
I went to Antioch College, which is the ultra liberal school. Okay, and you know, well, imagine you in Endicott. Imagine what it was like. What did I know about that? We showed up there. Well, it's funny. I'll tell you. My girlfriend, his name was Vicky Vokulich, and her parents, maybe you even know, own you. I bet you know this. Owned Lou John's Soup to Nuts. It was on the Vestal Highway. Tell me you didn't know that.
I don't think I do know that one. I know the Vestal Steakhouse and Ready Kilowatt and all that.
No, no, it's right. And anyway, they lived behind the store. Okay. My father's a professor at Harper College. It became the State University of New York. And we 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 didn't eat that well or that much. For five of us, I had two brothers. We get a pint of ice cream and divide it five ways. That's the way we were. And we went to the Carvel. We'd always get the dime cone.
Carvel, yes, Carvel. Tom Carvel, famous
Exactly.
ice cream man. Yes.
So
Uh,
anyway, so they lived behind the store. And I love to go to there because you could take whatever you wanted. They had food upstairs and they sold appliances downstairs. And if you wanted a frozen pizza, if you wanted a steak, you could take whatever you wanted. And so then I applied to Antioch, and I didn't know anything about it. And I said to my mother when I went, "Why the heck didn't you let me go and visit with me so I could at least find what it was really truly about?" You wouldn't be seen with us. When we go to the movie theater, you'd insist on being left off 2 blocks beforehand. So of the famous Lou and John's had had a big tattoo on her arm, on her upper arm, and always had sleeveless, no matter how sleeveless, sitting in front of the cash register. And so they agreed to take us out to Antioch. And so Vicky applied too to Antioch, and my parents were appalled because they thought I was going to knock her up, which very easily could have happened. But anyway, so they drove out the 600 miles to Ohio with us in the Lou and John's red van, okay? And I went to Robert Hall. You remember Robert Hall? Robert Hall was the mass clothier. When you got your Sunday suit, that's where you went. The cheap, big, just this big warehouse full of suits. And I went out there. I didn't know where I was going, so I wore my suit, and we arrived at Yellow Springs, and these guys in their beards and sandals are sitting out there on the stoop in the front, waiting to see the new crop of freshman women. And we come in, and I got out my suit, and Lou and John soup to nuts, and Lou with her tattoo on her arm. And believe me, they'd seen some strange things, but nothing as strange as that.
When's the last time you were in Vestal,
Uh,
like visiting?
Probably my father's funeral.
How long ago was that?
Uh, Gosh, it's got to be 15 years. I got to tell you a story about that, since you're from Endicott. Yeah, my brother's worked in New York. He's a lawyer, lived in New Jersey. My parents came down for a visit, and my father got sick in New Jersey, and not able to get back. So my mother went into a kind of continuing care community where she had a lovely little apartment. My father was in a nursing home. He was there about 5 years. So they hadn't been back to Vestal for 7 or 8 years. And and he died. And they thought that we went to the Vestal Methodist Church. That's our church. And we go back to have a service, but nobody's going to be there, but that's okay. And I'm tearing up as I say this. So we went back, and the service, the church was filled to overflowing. Even on Christmas, I've never seen it that full. That's how much my father was loved. And he
Wow.
wanted he wanted to have his ashes uh, put in Coconut Creek behind our house there. And when we first moved there, it had been this beautiful clear stream with fish in it, and it turned kind of foul. And I didn't want to put his ashes there, but that's what I insisted. So we went up Front Street and stopped from the bridge there, and I walked down, and I swear to God, that day the water was totally pure. And I put my father's ashes in the water.
Wow.
They flowed down the Susquehanna.
Yep. Yep. Wow. You're bringing up a lot of names that I remember, places and businesses and so on. Yeah, it's it's a storied place. Well, the whole Triple Cities is a
But
storied place.
small towns are the way to grow up, as far as I'm concerned.
Now, so when you graduated from Vestal High, you're a Golden Bear, is that right?
Yes, indeed.
And then college, it was Antioch, you said,
Yeah,
is where you went. And you went to Columbia as well, I believe, right?
yeah. I went, and then I went to the Peace Corps in Nepal, and then I went to the University of Oregon for 2 years, and then I went to Columbia.
University of Oregon also, the Ducks. Okay.
Yeah.
So you've been around. So the Tom, I guess another thing we have in common besides being from the Triple Cities is I'm a big Tom Wolfe fan. And it sounds like you are as well. You
Oh,
said
am I ever? Am I ever?
yeah, I've read almost everything he's written.
Yes, so have
So
I. So have I.
so tell me about to begin with, tell me why you don't really need to tell me, but I want their listeners to hear what just on if they've never read him, then I'd be surprised if they never read him. But say why Tom Wolfe was such a transcendent talent.
First, he was a brilliant man. He had a PhD in American Studies from Yale University, okay? And he wore that lightly. And he had this over-the-top style that people didn't like. I mean, he often was criticized. It was just too much. But he took subjects that nobody else would take that seemed kind of trivial. Look, in my new book, there's Tom Wolfe's in my new book because he wrote one of his first successful pieces was about Baby Jane Hosler, who was Andy Warhol's first superstar. Okay, and he wrote this wonderful piece about her called Girl of the Year, where he basically is making fun of her. I'm sure she doesn't understand that even now, how trivial and embarrassing it was, her running around showing off all the time. And when the book came out the following year, he went down to the University of Texas and he gave a speech. And the title of his speech was Why Baby Jane Holster is More Important Than the War in Vietnam. Now, do you think he thought that this war, the 85,000 Americans died? Of course he didn't think that. He was making that satirical point. And he was just an amazing person.
Hmm. Name some of the other great writers who were influential to you or that you just really enjoyed reading their material.
Well, I love Hemingway. I think the trouble with you're great is people begin to caricature you, okay? And that's what happened to Hemingway. That's what happened to Tom Wolfe. People tried to pick up his style. They couldn't do it again and again. All these people, all these great writers.
Well, his writing style it was so electric that if anybody who tried to imitate Tom Wolfe, it would be obvious. At
What
first
they
glance, that
did.
you're trying to imitate Tom Wolfe. That's you're not Tom Wolfe. Find your own voice.
Right, right.
Gay Talese, was he one of the people whose writing you
Jake
appreciated?
Leach did a great thing, that famous story about Frank Sinatra and
Yes.
that. Uh,
Frank Sinatra had a cold. And I got to
yeah,
tell you, I blame the editors at Esquire for, that was his signature sentence in that whole profile.
right,
And they stole it from the story and put it in the headline, which
right.
is you're not supposed to do as an editor. You just stole the writer's thunder.
Exactly,
That was like the exclamation point right there early in the magazine profile. And they went and blew it for him.
exactly.
And I had told him that I've had him on the program, and he like you, very energetic. He's in his 90s now and still working hard.
Wow, no
Uh,
kidding.
yeah. He stops at he says restaurants are kind of the new theater. He stops at a favorite restaurant or two, sits at the bar and has a gin martini. He says I only have one because it's very powerful.
Uh,
Now, let me ask you about post Warhol. That's coming out May 6, 2025. Is that right?
Yeah, you got it.
And then do you already have something that you're working on beyond that?
No, no, this thing is, I've just gone through the edits and I'm going with the fact checker now. So I'm still having the last minute. And then I got to get the photographs and then I got to figure out what to do next. But come on, I'll be 83 in October. I don't know what
You
I'll
don't
do.
sound like it. You don't sound like it. So does
I'll,
that mean, I mean, is it typical for you to finish a project? I mean, even 20, 30 years ago, finish a project before you start thinking about your next one.
oh no, I'm always thinking about my next one, but it's hard to come up with subjects.
So has there been biography that you had to abandon because it just wasn't coming together? You couldn't have the access you needed.
Not really, no.
So when you set your mind to it, you got it done. You always then
You get
you're dealing
people.
with people who are famous enough that there's a lot of material out there. So even if they don't cooperate or they're dead, you've got access to lots of historical material.
Plus, people like to talk, particularly if they're at a certain age. If they're 30, they might not do it, but if they're 60, they're probably going to talk.
Why is that?
Because if they're 30, they're looking at their future. They want to be so careful what they say. And when you're 60, so much of your life is behind you. You're not going to lose anything, even if the guy screws you up in the interview.
Yeah, you do the fear factor kind of goes away. You do get braver with age, I think, in most cases, at least in that regard,
Right.
that you're not afraid that what you say is going to hurt you.
And I would advise people, if the journalist, if you think that journalist is honest, cooperate with him. I mean, on this new book of mine, babe, Jane Holzer, who's my neighbor in Palm Beach, she didn't want to talk to me. Big mistake. She should have done it.
You know, your Warhol book certainly sounds like one that could also be a series. Is there? You probably have a good agent
No, well, Ryan Murphy is interested in seeing it. That's for sure. Ryan Murphy has optioned the Hitchcock's Blondes too,
Oh, is that right? Okay, so um,
and he's fabulous.
so there may be, the Warhol book I could, yeah, see certainly Hitchcock too, but the Warhol book I could see
It's his kind of
go in that
stuff.
direction.
There are a whole bunch of people that are interested in it, but he would be my first choice.
So, do you pick? You don't pick subjects necessarily thinking cinematically. You pick them based
No,
on.
but I'm writing it now cinematically. I'm writing each chapter is a story within itself. Each chapter has a dramatic ending leading to the next. That doesn't diminish the writing. I think it makes the writing better, but it makes it more compelling for a movie.
Gotcha. So, do you change is your writing style? Do you consider it to be consistent regardless of subject, or do you, um, how do I say this? Do you actually tailor the writing a little bit, like change the tonality of it a little based on who your subject is?
Well, I don't think I'm totally conscious. So for example, this new book has a 60s scent to it. I mean, that's my period. That's my era. So I can write about. I went right back there the way I wrote it.
Now, and you ended before you said before Studio 54 had come into play and all that.
Yeah.
Why did you end it there? Well, how did you decide that I'm going to go this far with it?
Well, because I start. Look, the interesting thing about him is that he only painted. His pop art lasted for no more than 5 years. Okay, people don't realize that he was an artist for 5 years, basically. Okay, and then he turned to these movies, these films, the underground films, most of which nobody's even seen. Okay, and so but that was interesting period as he evolved, and then he shot for Valerie Solanas, and that changes everything. So that's kind of how it ends after he shoots it, what he is like then, and he becomes very commercially just concerned about money.
I had no idea. So 5 years was all he spent in producing fine art. I mean, paintings.
Yes, yes, yes.
Um, yeah, I had no idea. And
It's
then he's
compared
done
to
a lot of underground film that you say a lot of people haven't seen. I certainly haven't seen it.
his
Um,
admirers compare him to Picasso and Michelangelo. I don't think so.
Well, now who is your muse? You write about Warhol's muses and other people's muses. Do you have a muse?
It's funny you say that because my brother Ed, who's a professor, says that the whole story of my life is about my mother's love. I want my mother's love. And I never could get it. She never gave it to me the way I needed it. I mean, growing up, then it's Protestant family, WASP family. We didn't we didn't say we love you. We didn't touch each other. It's verboten to touch each other. When my father was on his deathbed, I said, "Dad, I love you," and he kind of flinched. You don't say that. Uh,
Hmm.
and my mother, the same thing. My parents would never praise us, and so I guess I hunger for that.
That sounds so similar to the household I grew up in. I mean, there was some touching, but the my parents are products of the Depression. They grew up during the Depression. It was a
Yeah,
very
so
stiff
did
upper lip sort of upbringing, and it was a big family, and you lived hand to mouth because you were immigrants.
right,
Uh,
right,
and yeah, no, I get what you're saying. It was a different time and a different attitude about that, and you knew the love was there, but it wasn't expressed. It just wasn't expressed.
right.
The way my dad showed love was he'd work his tail off to support seven children, and he'd be there if to take you to the hospital if you got hurt. I mean,
No, and the mistake people make when they look at that is that doesn't mean your parents and my parents didn't love us so much. They did. They just showed it in a different way. Okay, they didn't show it, but they loved us so much.
yeah, yeah. No, I get it. Having lived through it, our backgrounds, yeah, that whole area, um, that time, that area, and the Depression and the war and all of those factors coming into play. Um, so, who is the quintessential Lawrence Lamer? I mean, if you were to uh, I know this isn't an easy question, but if you were to kind of boil yourself down to a sentence, a phrase, an adjective, who are you at your essence?
Well, look, I've been incredibly lucky to have lived all these lives. I've written 20 books. I've lived 20 lives. I've learned
Mhm.
about all these people. I liked, I mean, one way I agree, then I understand Warhol is I like to stand on the edge. I don't like to be in the middle. If I go to a party and I'm working and I'm interviewing people, I enjoy it. I'm fine. If I go to have a good time, it's just as another guest. I don't like it at all.
Do you prefer the writing process more, or the research, or do you see them as one and the same?
I guess they're one and the same.
Yeah. How long does it take? Actually, let me ask you this. You've written a lot of books, and this is a question I think probably no author likes to be asked, but is there one in particular that you feel will better than any other either stand the test of time or one that you're most proud of?
Who knows? I wrote the strangest things. I wrote a book called "A Madness Under the Royal Palms" about Palm Beach. Came out 18 years ago, and it was very controversial. In fact, it got me banned from the Palm Beach Daily News. You will never see my name in that paper, okay? Because they were so upset with that book. Uh, I got a call or an email from my agent yesterday saying there's a Polish publisher wants to publish that book after 18 years. I mean, that's pretty good.
I'd say so. I would say so. Was there one that you enjoyed writing more than any other?
Well, I don't know. I think the book that was most intimate was Ascent, which is the spiritual and physical quest of Willie Ansel. Willie Ansel climbed Everest in 1963. He lost nine of his toes. He was the director of the Peace Corps. I knew him. In fact, we got lost in the jungles together. He came back, and he was one of the inventors of the philosophy of outward bound, that you have to go out and risk your life. When he went out to Evergreen College and taught there, when he's about 50, when he was in 1948, he went to India and he saw this mountain called Nanda Devi, and he wanted to go back and get married and have a daughter called Nanda Devi. He did just that. when he was in his early 50s, he decided he wanted to die. But first, he wanted to take his daughter down to Debbie to that mountain, have her climb to the top of that mountain. It would have been the highest, at that point, a woman had ever climbed. And then he's going to let himself die off the side of the mountain. And the family agreed that he was going to do that. They went over there and suddenly didn't want to die. And she got sick. They got within a few hours of the summit at night, and she died in the tent. They took the body out, and they put her lover, her friend, and Willie linked hands, and he gave a prayer to this world of such fragility and beauty that even my daughter's death justifies my philosophy, and cast the body off into the darkness. And he started going around America giving these talks about this. And some people, oh, what a wonderful man. But people who knew climbing and really knew him intimately felt this guy was a very depressed, troubled man. 3 years later, at Everglades, he said anybody could do anything. That was his belief. So his students, the big term event was to climb Mount Rainier. Some of them weren't dressed properly. Some of them weren't physically prepared. He led them up to the top of the mountain. The weather turned, and because they weren't well prepared for this, he had to take them down the direct day way called Cadaver Gap, and he died, and one of the students died. Robert Redford was going to make a movie out of that. In fact, Redford went to Nepal and almost died.
My guest has been Laurence Leamer, Uber biographer. You've heard the names of the people who he has documented, and upcoming is Andy Warhol, biography and his story, May 6th, 2025. Pre-order it now. I'm sure you can't pre-order it yet, but it's still in progress. From Vestal, New York to Washington, D.C. and Florida and all points in between. Laurence, thank you so much for coming on the program. I really appreciate your taking the time.
This was great fun. Thank you.